All right, we are going to get started. I know a few of you are still popping in, so a few housekeeping notes before we get going. Use the chat to let us know where you're joining us from. All questions for our presenters need to be added to the Q&A. If you put it in the chat, we won't be able to answer it, so please put questions in Q&A. And finally, if you have a reaction to a presentation, feel free to use the reaction button at the bottom of your screen. Our presenters love to hear from you. Lots of hearts, lots of clapping. It's a great interaction tool. All right. Well, happy NISAW. Greetings and welcome to our final day of webinars for the 2024 National Invasive Species Awareness Week. My name is Christy Trifone-Millhouse, your NISAW Executive Director. I want to start today by thanking our partner and sponsor, CAST, and the speakers that presented yesterday on risk assessment. For those who missed these powerful webinars, you can access NISAW recordings next week on the NISAW YouTube channel. Our theme for this year's NISAW event is Protecting North American Biodiversity. NISAW is an international event powered by NISAW to raise awareness about invasive species, the threat they pose, and what can be done to prevent their spread. Even though we're at our final webinar today, you can continue to take action today, this weekend, and throughout the entire year. NISAW shared with you links that give you the ability to connect directly with your U.S. senators and House representatives. Please take time to do this, as every voice counts. We want to hear from all of you. There's also still time to share information from the NISAW toolkit on your own media channels and with your own communities. Finally, taking action means getting involved and sharing with others. We expand our realm of possibilities by extending our networks. Before jumping into the main event, I'd like to take a moment to give some thanks and to share some more information. Okay. Incredible sponsors here. Events like this are a huge lift for the organization, and sponsorship is critical to make every aspect of this event happen. A hearty thank you to our NISAW 2024 sponsors for your generous support. We value your partnership, and we look forward to celebrating with you this event's success. We're hoping to host a NISAW in-person event in 2025 and are currently seeking partners to help support this effort. Please reach out if you have capacity to invest or if you know someone, an organization, foundation that might be interested. All right, now a little bit about NISAW. For those who don't know us, NISAW is deeply vested in our mission to empower the management of invasive species in North America. We are led by an eclectic 18-member board of leading experts and professionals, with supporting committees, a strong NISAW team, and a membership that continues to grow in numbers by the day. If you're interested in joining us, have some interest in joining a committee, maybe you're interested in a board position, please get in contact with us and let us know. Our core programming is designed to provide our community with the connections needed to learn about advancements in the field and to share lessons learned. We also provide a collective voice for our community through events like NISAW. Lastly, we aim to provide the tools such as professional development, international standards, campaigns, and the NISAW Certified Weed-Free Product Program to broaden our impact and to help further our mission. A special event we have coming up this year you will not want to miss, our 2024 NISAW Annual Conference, co-hosted with the Montana Invasive Species Council. Please mark your calendars and plan to join the over 300 attendees in Missoula, starting September 30th through October 3rd. Our theme this year is sharing stories and celebrating partnerships. There will be over 70 sessions to attend, with 2 additional events, including a symposium on annual grasses hosted by our partners, at the University of Wyoming Institute for Managing Annual Grasses Invading Natural Ecosystems, and the Invasive Annual Grasses Technical Transfer Partnership. The second event will be the Continental Dialogue on Non-Native Forest Insects and Diseases, hosted by our partners, the Nature Conservancy. This is an event you will not want to miss. So head to our NISAW website and get registered today. Want to break on registration and join us for other events like today's NISAW webinars? Become a NISAW member. I strongly encourage all who are not currently members to become members. A membership investment helps us to continue to do our work as a 501c3. You can see here, there's lots of opportunities for you to consider. If you have any questions about membership or interests, please reach out. Okay, one final note before beginning our webinar. I want to say again a big thank you to our NISAW sponsors and an additional thank you to our NISAW presenters, the NISAW Legislative Committee, with a special thanks to NISAW board member Mark Heilman, who chairs that committee, and our amazing NISAW team. It takes an incredible amount of planning and management to pull an event like this off. If we were in person, I'd ask for all of you to give a round of applause. But if you could be so kind to share your favorite reaction to this week's event, I think it would help to recognize all of the efforts of so many. Thank you. Yes. All right. So the person in charge of NISAW and coordinating all the moving parts is NISAW's very own Government Relations Director, Elizabeth Brown. NISAW is a year-long planning event, and there is still work to be done after the week's events are over. Let's give another round of applause for all of Elizabeth's efforts. All right. Thanks so much. All right, now I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth, and she will moderate our final NISAW webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. That was so kind. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Happy Friday. It's Biodiversity Friday. So excited that you are here to join us for our last webinar of National Invasive Species Awareness Week 24. We have three outstanding speakers for you today, and in the interest of time, I'm only going to introduce them by their titles, but please know their full bios are available on the NISAW event calendar, so take a look at that if you have not already. Starting us off today is Regan Smyth, the Vice President for Data and Methods at NatureServe. And just a few reminders for those watching, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We will hold questions till after the three presentations. Then we'll have some time for a Q&A session. All right, that looks great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. As Elizabeth said, I'm Regan Smyth. I'm the Vice President for Data and Methods at an organization called NatureServe. NatureServe exists to provide critical information on biodiversity in North America. So it is great to be participating in this biodiversity-focused session today. I am going to use my time today to try to put some of the biodiversity needs in context. So today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about what we know about North American biodiversity, its needs, and how that relates to efforts to control invasive species. Every year, the World Economic Forum releases a report on global risks. And in those reports, biodiversity loss is consistently identified right up there with climate action failure as a risk that falls high on both the impact and likelihood scales. This is because the natural world around us, is not just inspiring, but it's sustaining to human life. Biodiversity through individual species and complex ecological processes is what feeds us and clothes us and houses us. It provides the innovation for medical advances and the goods for the items we consume, and it's what will buffer us against climate disaster. To keep natural systems intact and to stem biodiversity loss, reduce human risk, We really need to be addressing the drivers of that loss, including the impacts of invasive species. I think there's often this temptation to look at reports like the one I just shared and think, yes, that's absolutely true. We need to go save those rainforests. But the truth is, species and ecosystems in our own backyard are similarly at risk. This map was released by NatureServe in 2022 and really highlights areas of conservation need right here in the United States. From the incredible freshwater stream systems of Appalachia, to the incredible botanical richness of the desert Southwest, we're losing species right here at home, and we're seeing declines in functionality of ecosystems as well. Last year, NatureServe released a report on the status of biodiversity in the United States, really a synthesis of all this information that we collect. I'm going to use my time today to talk about some of the findings of that report and how they relate to the efforts of this community to address impacts from invasives. One of the key findings from our assessment is American biodiversity really is in crisis. 34% of plants and 40% of animals are at risk of extinction, and 41% of ecosystems are at risk of range-wide collapse. We hear a lot about the biodiversity crisis in the news, but I think this report really drives home how we're feeling that crisis right here at home and why efforts to control invasives are so important. Before I go more into our findings, I want to talk a tiny bit about where this information comes from. NatureServe coordinates a biodiversity information network for North America that consists of more than 60 different programs throughout the US and Canada. In the United States, those are often called natural heritage programs and housed in state government or universities, sometimes nonprofits. In Canada, those are conservation data centers. This NatureServe network, which started 50 years ago, provides an authoritative source for data on rare, threatened, and endangered species and the ecosystems that support them. Together, the network collects and analyzes and distributes information about those plants and ecosystems in support of conservation. That information allows us to answer those questions that I showed on that previous slide, to provide numbers like this showing the percentage of species that are at risk. To get to these numbers, first we need to quantify the units of analysis for both species and ecosystems. And we play a pretty important role in managing that species taxonomy and working with partners to develop ecosystem classifications for North America. The second critical piece of information to get to these numbers is a defensible, repeatable way to determine what species are at risk. NatureServe's conservation status ranking methodology provides that system. Using information on rarity and threats and trends, we can quantify, which species and ecosystems are imperiled or vulnerable or secure. The percentages that are shown here are based on those conservation status assessments on that established methodology. The information that underlies that methodology is what lets us dig in and figure out how to act. So I want to dig in a little bit deeper on those percentages I showed. This shows the breakdown of conservation status for animals. What you're looking at here, the dark gray, is showing species that have been indicated to be possibly extinct. The red is things that are critically imperiled at a global scale. The orange is imperiled, the yellow is vulnerable. Together, that group is what we consider at-risk species, that 40% of species at risk for animals. We've also split those numbers down by taxonomic group. So you can see from this graph that it's not necessarily the birds and the mammals and the fish that are most at risk. It's sometimes often the sort of underappreciated biodiversity, the snails and the butterflies and the bees, the pollinators, the backbones of ecosystems that are often the things that need the most attention. One thing that comes out from this graph is that, animals found in freshwater habitats like amphibians and snails and mussels and crayfish, aquatic insects, are often those that are most at risk. Invasive species are part of the reason why, from chrytid fungus infecting amphibians to zebra mussels. This is a similar breakdown for plants, and you see some interesting patterns here by taxonomic group as well. Almost half of cactus species and about 200 tree species, nearly 1 in 5 grasses are at risk. Understanding these risks can help direct action. And while understanding species risks is important, we can also really step back and step up to the ecosystem level, asking if there's communities of plants and animals that together are more or less threatened. This is important as often conservation action is most efficient when directed at ecosystems rather than individual species. And threats, including invasives, often operate and can be treated on an ecosystem scale. The map that you're looking at here shows the National Vegetation Classification ecosystem groups, which we've helped map for North America, and provides a unit of thinking about risk and thinking about how to direct action. Using a similar conservation status assessment methodology as we use for species, we can ask which of these ecosystems are at risk, and importantly, why are they at risk? This graph is telling us that there are many different kinds of ecosystems that face range-wide collapse, from wetlands to forests. Temperate grasslands are particularly at risk. Over half of 78 types in the United States are considered globally imperiled or vulnerable. Invasive species like cheatgrass, Japanese brome are part of the reason why. One thing that I'd be remiss, if I didn't point out is that this graph is really looking at threats across the full ecosystem range, what's imperiled globally. But there's types that might be considered secure at a global level that are nevertheless highly degraded locally, diminishing the biodiversity value and ecosystem services that they provide. So while it's important to think about these global risks, it's also important to understand what's going on in a particular location. Those past slides showed the global trends, but what does that mean for action? As I mentioned previously, the conservation status assessment process considers rarity and trends and threats. Digging into that threats information a little more deeply, we really start to see the contribution of invasive species on biodiversity health. These graphs show the top 3 threats for at-risk species and the different groupings. You can see that for plants and terrestrial animals, invasive species and disease are documented as a threat for over 50% of those at-risk species. For freshwater animals, it's also in the top 3 at 42%. If we're to maintain the diversity of life in this country, addressing invasive species has to be part of the solution. So those are the broad national trends. And wrapping up, I want to leave you with just a few images of what we're really talking about in practice. Shown at the top of the screen are examples of critically imperiled species and a vulnerable ecosystem, really the wealth of biodiversity that we have that is our natural heritage in this country. Shown at the bottom are some of the invasive species that threaten them. At the left, you see the salt marsh harvest mouse. This is a species endemic to coastal California, northern Mexico, that's listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. Its habitat is highly threatened by invasive cordgrass. The slender rush pea is a globally critically imperiled species found in just a couple locations in Texas. It's seen significant habitat loss due to development, but invasive grasses like Clerberg's bluegrass are threatening the limited locations where it's hanging on. One more example for species, the crimson Hawaiian damselfly, an example of one of those insects that's really that underappreciated backbone of ecosystems. Its populations have crashed in part due to the introduction of invasive predatory fish. At the ecosystem level on the right there, you see a picture of this incredible diversity in the California coastal beach dune and sand bluff ecosystem. At the bottom, you see what that ecosystem can look like when you have invasives like ice plant take over. So those are the threats we're facing. Those are the threats that are really impacting biodiversity in North America. And now we're kind of left to ask, where do we go from here? The good news is that the world is really starting to pay attention. There's new governmental commitments to stemming biodiversity loss coming out of COP15. There's new corporate requirements and interest in how do we measure biodiversity impacts and progress towards a nature positive future. The information that NatureServe provides can, really help us know where is biodiversity at risk, what is at risk, what are the threats, how do we know, where to act, how do we act? And it's the work that you are all doing, especially in addressing the critical threat of invasive species, that will really make a difference. And so with that, I'd like to wrap it up. There's a couple of resources on the screen, how to learn more. The link at the top there will bring you to the full report on biodiversity in the United States that we released last year. We have a lot of similar information for Canada. I know there's some Canadians on the phone as well, but I'm happy to answer any questions that come up in the Q&A. And thank you for the time.
Thank you, Regan. That was an outstanding presentation and such important work. We appreciate you sharing it with us. Next up, I would like to introduce NISAW board member and legislative committee chair, Dr. Mark Heilman, director of aquatic technology at CPRO. Mark will be presenting the selective management of invasive aquatic plants.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Regan, for a great presentation, kind of setting the stage of this topic of how do we protect our biodiversity. Elizabeth introduced that I'm involved with aquatic plant management, support a lot of public agencies around the country that are doing just this, trying to manage invasive aquatic plants in order to protect the biodiversity and particularly the habitat of threatened and endangered species in many cases. Invasive aquatic plants, here's a nasty picture of hydrilla growing in a central Florida lake. There's 7-8 feet of water underneath the surface there. And the hydrilla submerged plant has grown to the surface, been covered with algae. And this has a lot of impacts when aquatic invasive plants become this problematic. You have competition with native aquatic plants. Those natives are suppressed by that competition with the invasive. Dissolved oxygen levels drop, and there's other water quality impacts. Habitat use overall, from reproductive success to food web dynamics, are impacted. Relative to water quality, which I'll touch on as part of this, there's major impacts on nutrient cycling, biogeochemistry of aquatic sites that are impaired at this level with invasive plants. And then finally, there's interactions as well with some of the other environmental disturbances we have in watersheds and in climate and many other disturbances where the invasives basically have an advantage over our native biodiversity. So what's the benefits of management? And well, obviously the major goal is to restore ecological function or maintain that function. As I said, there's many impacts of these invasive species. Couple of examples: before and after management of the hydrilla site I just showed, as well as a giant salvinia site in North Carolina. And there's a variety of aquatic species that are at risk with the invasions of aquatic plants. And it was just highlighted in the previous presentation how many of those species are impacted. Prevention is certainly where we want to start management. We want to keep these species out. And if we have management occur, even to an eradication endpoint, can we prevent reintroduction? The full integrated toolbox is used and absolutely is needed. My focus is on the selective use of aquatic herbicides, and those are the case studies that I'll talk about today, that frequently used in rapid response and also in larger scale maintenance control. And in that larger scale maintenance control and all these actions, selectivity of management, having minimal impacts, as few as possible on target plants as well as fauna, and then maintaining control so that the system has an ability to adapt to conditions post-management and after removal of the invasive plant. So I'm going to quickly highlight 4 examples of where this is occurring, specifically ones that I'm familiar with that I've had some opportunity to help out with. This is examples of controlling certain invasive plants around North America. Agaricus densa is a submerged plant, particularly problematic in the California, Sacramento, San Joaquin River Delta. Talk about the efforts there with that species. Elodea is considered invasive. It may be native in much of North America, but in Alaska, it's an invasive species. And I believe Alaska's first invasive aquatic plant, and poses a risk to salmon and other habitat. Hydrilla, there's lots of examples of issues with hydrilla, considered the worst aquatic plant here in North America. I'll talk about some examples from North Carolina, and then finally talk about management of invasive plants, specifically hydrilla again, and its intersection with water quality that we're experiencing in Florida and many other places. California Delta Agraria management, I've already referenced the site. This is a major system that's been manipulated over time to provide water to Southern California, valuable use of water for crop irrigation. This is one of the major agricultural areas in the United States. There's also important navigation and shipping occurring, plenty of recreation occurring in the Delta. And also, as this is a very disturbed system over time, it has become a critical habitat for several endangered listed species, which are shown here, in particular, the Delta smelt. Agraria densa originally came into the Delta in the 1950s and now infests as much as 20% of the Delta, imposing a risk to all these uses and functions. In 1996, the California Parks Division of Boating and Waterways was formed a special program called the Agraria densa Control Program. This program began a process of evaluating methods and strategies to control Agraria and reduce its impact on the functions of the Delta. Through the early 2000s, all that was occurring. And then in 2007 began an operational effort in a variety of sites to begin to whittle down and improve habitat that was impacted by Agraria densa. The figure at the right shows the kind of progression and the amount of Agraria in one area, a key area of the Delta called Frank's Track. And you can see letter E, the reduction in 2007 with the beginning of management. Again, taking a condition as shown in the photo from basically monospecific conditions dominated by Agraria, impairing navigation and many other uses, to begin to restore the site. And this next table is taken from a paper that shows the progression of reductions of at least of Agraria density. It's not as reflected in the frequency of occurrence, but the progression in the improvement of habitat with the increased biodiversity, native species richness, and presence in the Frank's Track area as a result of management. And it really illustrates very clearly that if an invasive aquatic plant can be reduced in its impact, this is more of a selective maintenance control program, you can greatly improve the diversity, structure, and function of aquatic habitat. I'll switch gears to invasive Elodea in Alaska. It's pretty amazing, this whole story. I can only touch on the limited details implemented by federal and state partners in Alaska. But the pink dots show the distribution of Elodea that came into the system, or was first looked at for control in the early 2010s. And the main vector here is actually spread by float plane. You see on the right the figure of float planes and where they go, and the risk that they pose of spreading, in this case, invasive Elodea to different areas within Alaska. And the story, as has been recently published in a paper, is some of the impact to the salmon fishery and other critical habitat as Elodea turns the system into monoculture, less architecturally complex, reduced reproductive cycle success, and many impacts on both the salmon fisheries and other fish species, as well as the ecosystem at large. Partners have been developed starting in 2013, 2014 timeframe, an integrated pest management strategy for eradicating Elodea. Again, many partners involved in this, pulling expertise from many places in the US. And I can just in summary say there's been successes. To my knowledge, there's been at least 11 lakes where Elodea is considered eradicated. But unfortunately, there's a number of other sites that still have significant Elodea issues, and the battle with that species continues. but at least in the sites where management is occurring, habitat is being protected and restored. Eno River, North Carolina is a diverse small river that feeds into Falls Lake, a water supply lake for the Raleigh-Durham area. Very natural site and has a number of state listed species, including the pebble snail, which is unique to the state. Hydrilla was first detected in the river in 2005 and led to a process of discerning a strategy for management, leading to initiation of management in 2012. So this is conditions in the Eno River as entering the management. This is kind of the impacts, a shallow river that becomes more slow flowing in the summer. Perfect hydrilla habitat, as it turns out, and large impaired stretches, and management was able to remove through proper planning, a lot of assessment of potential non-target impacts to snails, and also important plant species such as water willow, and also riffleweed, which is an important host plant for the pebble snail. All of that lined up to conduct control of hydrilla in a selective way to improve the habitat and protect the potentially threatened species. Lake Waccamaw has actually occurred around the same time frame. Hydrilla came into this outstanding resource water in North Carolina. It was detected in about 10% of the lake, and about 960 acres were initially put under management to eradicate hydrilla from the lake. That effort ran through 2019, so about a 6-year cycle. And for the last 6 years or so, hydrilla has not been found in the lake and helped protect a variety of threatened species, including the federally listed Waccamaw silverside. An important aside is now the phase of preventing hydrilla reintroduction into Lake Waccamaw. And I'll just point out a recent effort to install boat washing stations at Lake Waccamaw at its 2 public access points. And I'll wrap up with a very interesting story that overlays a lot of aquatic ecosystem function and management, Lake Apopka in Florida. This is an ongoing effort. Back turn of the century and start of the 20th century, Lake Apopka, 30,000 acre system in central Florida, was dominated by native submerged aquatic plants. And unfortunately, disturbance in the watershed led to major changes in conditions, loading of phosphorus, disruption of water quality and clarity, and the system became phytoplankton dominant, very turbid, and phosphorus levels were very high. Through a strong effort by a variety of public agencies, including St. Johns River Water Management District, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and others, there's been an effort to help restore Lake Apopka through reducing nutrient inputs from the watershed, as well as promoting better habitat in the system. And this has been successful. You can see the graphs here show an improvement in the trophic status of the lake, as well as reductions in both lake total phosphorus and inflow from one of the major canals. Even with this improvement, Lake Apopka is still phytoplankton dominant overall, but is trending again to better water clarity. This is satellite data of the lake. I'd like to thank Dr. James Leary in Florida for providing this. Shows minimal hydrilla growth in 2019. There was maybe a few hundred acres of hydrilla that would pop up in certain areas, shoreline areas mainly, in years prior to this. Fortunately, starting about 2020 and certainly into 2021, a huge hydrilla infestation started, maybe distributed as much as 10,000 acres, perhaps more. And this is a result. It's a good sign in that now the lake can support submerged vegetation again. But unfortunately, because of its low light adaptations and aggressive invasive nature, this is still a very disturbed system. Hydrilla became the dominant. So the various partners, agencies began a process of managing hydrilla in the system. As 2022, the southern part of the lake was managed selectively for hydrilla. And then 2023 up until today, this is actually from earlier this year, hydrilla has been generally removed as far as major surface growth. And that process, though, has been done with as much attention to the selectivity that this control effort can provide to promote native aquatic plants. And so this kind of shows the continuum that Lake Apopka is on, shifting from the turbid HAB dominant state through water quality initiatives to being able to support at least invasive macrophytes, in this case hydrilla, at scale. And now it's a process of combining the water quality management strategies with selective aquatic plant management to continue to promote the highest quality habitat in a biologically diverse habitat that the lake used to look like in the past. So with that, I'll finish. Hopefully I was sort of within time. Just a quick photo of some Eurasian water milfoil management up in New York State and some underwater video from that. Aquatic plant management, we have an interesting toolbox. We have an ability to selectively remove some of our major North American invasive aquatic plants. And this has been driven by excellent research by the Corps of Engineers and Aquatic Plant Control Research Program and many federal and university and private efforts. And because of these strategies, aquatic plant management is able to relatively routinely restore aquatic plant community diversity and habitat quality. Obviously, it becomes a question of resources and ability to maintain these habitats. It's an ongoing process, but certainly there's many good case studies, hopefully a few that I've shown here that illustrate that it can be done and we can protect and restore biodiversity through aquatic plant management. I'll just make a plug for that research and operational funding needed for these efforts, especially in larger public systems. The Water Resources Development Act and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative are among the key sources of public funding that have been available in recent years for doing this kind of effort. And certainly it provides excellent return in terms of ecological function as well as economic return for affected systems and communities. So with that, I'll pause and thank everyone for attendance and note the Aquatic Plant Management Society as well as a source of knowledge. And thanks. I look forward to any discussion.
Thank you so much, Mark. You really clearly demonstrated the importance of invasive aquatic plant control for the conservation of native and imperiled species. So we certainly appreciate your time and energy to share with us today. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to introduce Abby Bezretzik Marino, Conservation Area Manager for the Long Island Invasive Species Management Area. Abby will be sharing how the Long Island Invasive Species Management Area PRISM approaches rare species conservation alongside invasive species management.
Great, thank you. So honored to be here. Yes, as you said, my name is Abby Bezretzik Marino, coming to you from New York, Long Island specifically, and happy to continue this conversation about protecting rare species. So as someone who's lived here on Long Island most of my life, Long Island, I could say, is unique in how much it is developed, but also the array of biodiversity that we have. Extending eastward from New York City, Long Island contains the landmass of Brooklyn and Queens and fades into suburbia. You might have heard of Levittown, pictured there as an example of planned suburban development. And even farther eastward, you get larger forests like the Long Island Pine Barrens, as well as farms, houses, and small towns interconnected by highways. And I say all that to illustrate the gradient of development that we have here. There are a ton of people, houses, and invasive species that go with it. But at the same time, Long Island is one of the most biodiverse regions of New York State. From beaches to upland forests, wetlands, remnant plains, maritime shrubland, and rare ecosystems like coastal plain ponds, which is pictured here, that ecological diversity, even if it's fragmented, still translates to a lot of biodiversity. The people that do recognize this amazing biodiversity are working hard to protect it from many threats, including invasive species. So as I mentioned, I work with the Long Island Invasive Species Management Area, and we're one of 8 partnerships for regional invasive species management, or PRISMs, that cover all of New York State. So our area has part of New York City, goes all the way to the end through the Hamptons and Montauk, more than 100 miles in length. And many of you may already be familiar with the PRISM concept. It's a collaboration, so we're keeping our eye on the species, surveying, managing them, coordinating management, early detection and rapid response. But we're also working with people, educating people, connecting partners, and collaborations. One of the reasons we focus on biodiversity in invasive species management comes from the need to prioritize. We have more than 600 invasive species on our tier list, either in the area or the surrounding area, with varying degrees of impact. And with New York City being a hub of activity and introductions for generations, many of them are already well established here, including some of the aquatic species mentioned in the last webinar. At the same time, we have 380 rare, threatened, or endangered species, at the state level and 55 significant ecological communities. What's more, I learned this week from Chief Botanist Rich Ring here in New York is that in New York, 46% of those rare, threatened, or endangered species exist within 100 meters of an invasive species. So that interface is right there in a lot of places. So with both of those counts for invasive species and rare, threatened, and endangered species being so high, you can't really work with one without thinking about the other. So to make the biggest impact on our management, we need to prioritize by species and by site. We look at what's new and emerging, what we can catch early, and also what areas are at the highest risk of threat from invasive species and how we can protect them. So my coworker Melody works on this early detection and rapid response end of things, and I work more on the conservation area, protecting biodiversity end of things. This means focusing on protecting the areas of high biodiversity and particularly areas with rare, threatened, or endangered species or threatened ecological communities. So what does that look like in practice? Well, it starts with the data. It was great to hear from Regan about NatureServe's data because we use some of that data here. We connect with our state's natural heritage program, and with them we have a data sharing agreement so we can pinpoint where these rare species and communities have been noted in the past. So in practice, ahead of a field day, we'll make a physical map to bring with us of these rare species or communities. It helps us know where to focus. So if we see an invasive plant in one of those areas, we know immediately that it's a priority for management. It might take a little bit more time to be familiar with the species, but the more you know your ecological community, the more you might be tuned into seeing new things that are different from the species you're used to identifying. It also helps us be mindful of where and how we manage to reduce soil disturbance in certain areas or avoid trampling in sensitive areas. And this partnership works both ways. We could also help our heritage program survey areas that they haven't been able to access in a while. Long Island's kind of hard to get to if you're in upstate New York. So if we're already there, we have our eyes out for it, we can help with data on both sides. It's also important that I said it's a data sharing agreement, so we're careful not to share this data outside our organization. Part of protecting these rare species means protecting the data because there are some bad actors there who would want to take it if they knew where it was. But there are also public sources of data that can be a good starting point. For New York, we have the New York State DEC Environmental Resource Mapper, and this is the significant ecological communities that's highlighted here. So while you're not seeing where rare species are, these are areas of importance to, so if you have invasive species, you already know that this is an area that's even more worthwhile for protecting because of the ecological community that's there. And I'm sure there might be equivalents in other states' public data to get you started in prioritization. PRISM staff in New York are also fortunate to have this tool from the New York Natural Heritage Program. It brings together biodiversity data from NYNHP alongside live updating invasive species data from IMAP Invasives. And this helps us to target our efforts with biodiversity threatened by invasive species. Also to build precautions into management efforts to avoid disturbance to nearby rare species habitat. And it's really great to have this information all in one place. Otherwise, we're downloading, putting different files together. So this is kind of an online platform that we can use and access easily. You could even look at it on our phones. So we're really grateful to have partners that could also help us put this data together and make it that much more accessible in this important work. So we're also protecting biodiversity through our mindset. We're not afraid to step away from the most invaded area, and this helps us find new and expanded populations early on. So on the left side, I have a map of our invasive species prevention zones, that's actually just 2 of them, which are large properties with relatively intact ecological communities and low numbers of invasive species. The ones highlighted here are in that Pine Barrens area, the forested area I mentioned. And what this map is showing are areas to focus on within those properties, showing in green the areas that have more biodiversity or rare species or ecological communities, and in redder shades the areas with invasive species presences or more disturbance. This helps us with 2 different goals. It helps us to highlight the areas to survey that are already of the highest quality, to check for invasive species encroachment. Just because there's not a presence there doesn't mean that nobody looked before. So it might be that nobody surveyed that area and there might be something there. It also helps us to monitor or manage areas that we already know have invasive species in these properties and prevent their further spread. And it's a nice visual. I like the colors. On the right, we have the water body map. So we created a map model for our water body work to highlight areas most in need of invasive species surveying and management. And as I mentioned, these are not the areas that are most invaded already, but the areas that would have the most to lose should they become invaded due to their ecological resources. For example, we have rare communities in coastal plain ponds, which have unique plant life due to the seasonality of water fluctuations, especially around the shoreline. And we want to check those areas first for invasive species so we can protect that community. We share these priorities with partners like towns, county parks, and nonprofits, and we do surveying and coordinate management if we find something. So it's really partner-driven effort. Also developed with the Long Island Metro Aquatic Invasive Species. So we also are able to use this approach to have found really small or even less than 100 stands of Phragmites that were previously undetected in coastal plain ponds. And if grown, they could outcompete several rare plants. So we've seen that happen at some coastal plain ponds, and when we find it in these other ones, we really want to make sure that's a target for management. It's also helped us find previously unknown populations of water chestnut or Traponatans in a state park water body that had otherwise no aquatic invasive species. So it's small enough to manage by hand, and we were really able to get ahead of that early because of this approach. Next, we also adjust our metrics to track what we're protecting. It's really hard to measure something that didn't happen, but that can actually be the most powerful result that you have. If you catch a species early before it takes over, and if you can know what kind of ecological community it was, or what native rare species were around, that gives some context to exactly what kind of resource you preserve through your actions. And that could be helpful to explain to funders, to the public, to your partners, giving greater context to your work. In this picture here, my coworkers Melody and Cassidy are doing some of that surveying for a native plant population where we're about to be managing Phragmites. Again, we're not managing Phragmites across the whole region because there's way too much of it, but in these areas where there's very small stands of it, where it's threatening some of this rare or native plants, it's an important thing. So I'd recommend in this that not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is a really simple metric, and it doesn't need to be incredibly fancy for you to start collecting this data and also seeing the impact of your management through how the native biodiversity has shifted in doing your management at a site. And lastly, I think it's important to try to cross boundaries more than just getting in and out in invasive species management, keeping a curiosity for the plant and animal life around you. So we're fortunate as LISMA and as a PRISM to work outside our organization when we can. In this picture here, we're about to manage another very small stand of Phragmites alongside fisheries colleagues who surveyed there for rare banded sunfish and swamp darter. So being able to do that in the same time, side by side, helps both of us learn about each other's work. And it might take more coordination, but can be much more rewarding because you can see these cross-level interactions. It's great to stop and investigate also because maybe there's something more going on at the site ecologically than just invasive species. So in summary, knowing the data, finding the leading edge, being able to measure it and cross boundaries are all ways that we incorporate biodiversity and rare species conservation in our work. And a shout out to my awesome team, Bill, Melody, and Cassidy. We're a small team, but we get a lot done with just a few people. And one final shout out, we have a big event next Friday, the Resilient Long Island Symposium. If you want to hear more about Long Island conservation, there are remote options. So we have room for all of you if you want to come. And if you want to find that, lisma.org, you'll see it right there. And thank you.
Thank you. That was outstanding. I'm going to add that event to our NISAW events calendar so it can get more reach for you. That was great. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, go ahead and enter any questions you have for any of our presenters in the Q&A box. We have a couple of minutes for questions, and then we have something exciting and new to share with you. So, Mark, it looks like you have a couple of questions in there. Let's see. I always try to see who has the most votes here, because you guys, if you see a question that you want answered, click that little thumbs up and it'll push it to the top of the list. So it seems that much of the aquatic plant management you shared today focuses on herbicide use. Are there other biological controls that could be utilized? And is that information available for the public?
Yes, certainly. As I have referenced, the whole integrated pest management toolbox needs to be used. And there's a ongoing and historical effort to look for selective biocontrol agents that's administered by USDA with many partners globally. Another resource I would suggest would be, again, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Aquatic Plant Control Research Program. One part of that program is focused on biocontrol research, and Dr. Nathan Harms would be an excellent point of contact, and I can actually put his email here in the chat here in a second. That would be helpful.
Great, thank you. And I just posted a link to our biological control resources on the NISAW website. We have an outstanding and very active biocontrol committee that has published biological control fact sheets, and there are several for aquatic species that are published. And we have a big event coming up next month in Annapolis that is sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service on biological control. So get a look at that at our events calendar. So a few plugs for NISAW's biological control work, because we have some great members doing really good work on biocontrol. Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Great question. Okay, how can I find out if my local body of water preservation, protection, and monitoring even exists? How do I know who's monitoring the water quality and the wildlife in my local water body? Any advice for folks on how to get connected to that sort of information locally? And that could be for Regan, Abby, or Mark. Well, maybe I can go. I would probably start with my county or my city. That's probably where I would start. I would probably, if I wanted to know about water quality monitoring, I'd probably look at my municipal water provider or my county water provider, wildlife, state fish and game, county wildlife officers. So I would start digging around and poking into the government services in my area and try to find some contacts that I can get in touch with. Often there are master gardeners and master wildlife programs and extension programs that can connect you to the right people locally. So those are just a few suggestions for me. Regan, I saw you pop on. Did you have some ideas for folks on how to maybe get connected locally?
No, I was going to mention the natural heritage programs if you're looking for information on particularly rare species in the states, or often invasives as well, though that differs a little bit state by state on the resources that might be available.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Okay, what resources are available to find out what invasive species, aquatic or terrestrial, are in my area? There seems to be lots of different places to look, different states, but nowhere with everything. I don't know of a site that has every list for every state and every local government, but I would probably maybe go to some of our databases like EdMaps or IMAP Invasives or USGS NAS system to see what species were in my area. Any other recommendations for databases or listservs that folks can look at to get those sorts of EdMaps sorts of databases? I don't think they have the regulatory information, but at least you could see what's near you. Other ideas?
iNaturalist has a lot of community sourced observations. We use that a lot too, as well as IMAP invasives.
Yeah, I love iNaturalist. That's one of my favorite things. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, we are just about out of time. There's one more question for Mark, but he's typing an answer. So thank you so much for taking care of that. I have something very exciting I want to share with you before I let you all leave today. For the last probably 6 months, we have had a subcommittee of folks working within NISAW on the topic of biodiversity and invasive species. And so it is truly a great privilege that I get to be the one with our outstanding speakers today to share with you the release of our latest position paper here at NISAW titled Biodiversity and Invasive Species. And you can get that on NISAW.org/biodiversity and read the whole paper. I'll stick that in the chat for you. Within this position paper, there are 11 legislative recommendations and 7 policy recommendations. And so take a look at that. And please connect with us in our legislative committee if you have questions or comments or thoughts, or if you would like to help elevate this issue through advocacy and education and awareness over the next year and beyond. And I want to thank our legislative subcommittee on biodiversity. These fabulous people met with me every couple of weeks for the last 6 to 9 months, and they put in a lot of work and time and energy, and they are truly experts in the top of their field. And I just want to thank them from the bottom of my heart for all of their effort on this paper. And also Tom Booz, our NISAW president, Christy Trifone-Millhouse, NISAW's executive director, and our entire board of directors. We appreciate your input and expertise and your support of the work of our legislative committee. So thank you so much. A final thanks to our 2024 NISAW sponsors. We cannot do the work we do without your sponsorship and donations. If anybody wants to get involved and be a NISAW sponsor for 2025, give me a call. We'd love to chat with you about that. But thank you so much to everyone who contributed this year to support our efforts. NISAW is 1 week a year, but it doesn't have to technically end. We do this work all year, and it does take all of us to collectively raise the voice of invasive species management and build capacity to do this important prevention and control work in order to protect native biodiversity. So please visit NISAW.org. We have a new Take Action Center this year, and there's opportunities. You just click on those links, and it'll populate an email to your U.S. Senators and representatives. And sorry to my Canadian friends, we're working on getting a Take Action Center for you as well. This is US focused, but we have great hopes to move and help elevate invasive species management in Canada and Mexico, as well as a North American leader in this space. Our NISAW events calendar is year round. So if you have conferences and events and things going on throughout the year, this is intended to really hold all those invasive species events, be them local events, maybe you're doing a weed poll, or maybe a webinar or a large conference, whatever it is, please put your events in the NISAW events calendar and take a look at that to see where you can get involved locally or at the regional or national level. Finally, please feel free to share the free NISAW toolkit all year long and follow us on Facebook at Invasive Species Week and share out that content. We hope you will also join us next year for NISAW 2025. Stay tuned to the website for the dates on that. We hope to get those settled soon. Next year, our theme will be focused on enhancing North American biosecurity. And with that, that concludes our final webinar of NISAW 2024. Thank you to every one of our sponsors, especially Regan, Abby, and Mark for being here today. You did an outstanding job, and we are so grateful to you. Thank you to every attendee and to all of our sponsors and all of our members. Have a great day, everyone. Happy Biodiversity Friday, and thank you for being a part of National Invasive Species Awareness Week.